What up, world? You already know what time it is. It's your boy Mac Mizzle, the host with the most. Don't need to brag, no boast. All I do is give a toast to the real folks. Let them pave the way, the real way. First players to play. We're gonna have a good one for you tonight. I'm a player partner with me. My right hand, WI, in the
What
building.
up?
Place to be.
What up? What up? What up? What up? What up? What up? Woke and Smoke, Mac Mizzo show.
Yeah, we back at it. Came to chop it up with me about this review.
Yes, sir.
My reaction to this buck breaking DVD, man. This is truly one of Tariq's best work. I got to
Mm-hmm.
tip my hat to him for that. You know, you tell that he put in his time. You know what I'm saying? Learned along the way.
Yeah. Nah, I mean, yo, I didn't really, I ain't gonna lie to you, I didn't get a chance to look into it, but I'm definitely
Let me give
trying to
y'all a
see.
little bit of history though.
I'm definitely trying to look. I'm trying to see what's going on with it though.
Tariq's first DVD by the name of Hidden
What
Colors
color?
1 was done by the same group. Uh, or done by the same recording group as my boy right here's first video. Well,
Mm-hmm.
not his first video, but their first video
Right.
by the name of what was it called? When he makes the world go round. And Lab Noise is the label, you know.
That's
Just like
right.
so, Lab Noise is the one that really put out Tariq Nasheed to the forefront
Right.
as a product. So you gotta tip your hat to those cats, you know what I'm saying, as well.
Straight up.
Shout out to Conquistador,
Conquistador.
our big homie, you know. What they call him? Sharky? No, they don't call what do they call him again?
Full course.
Yeah, full course, but they call him another name. No?
Richie. Richie.
Richie, full court, yeah, full course, yeah. It's Richie.
Yep. Shout
Anyway,
out to them. Shout out to them for sure. They put in that early work. You said.
my boy bust out the one of the illest videos in Montreal at the time. And one of the illest DVDs of all time, concerning Black history, was from the same people. So
Right.
you see chronologically speaking, this is part of Black history when you really break it down. You know?
Shit.
You know what I'm saying? When you make the world go around. But let's go ahead and get into this game, man. So I was watching the DVD for Buck Breaking. I was astounded, you know,
Yeah.
because there's a lot of shit that I knew, shit that I didn't know. They break it down so eloquently, like they show us how certain shit is really orchestrated behind the scenes
Right.
while they're trying to co-opt our movement as being oppressed, you know, when it comes to the LGBTQ community and how it's like affecting us on a
Right.
psychological level. And it's all propaganda at the end of the day, you know. They want to propagandize the whole movement for their benefit
Right.
because along with having looking out for white genetic survival, they got to think about their own shortcomings, you know, because their own wants and desires are of primitive people, you know, before we came in civilized, you know, the white man, so to speak. So I'm gonna play a little bit of this DVD. I ain't giving y'all none of the clips online. Y'all gotta go watch that yourself. But I'm gonna play some of it. You know what I'm saying? And we're gonna chop it up about it for a bit.
All right, let's get it, bro.
This is gonna be part one of my reaction to the butt breaking DVD. So you gotta listen tight. You know what I'm saying? I know. It's easier to listen with visuals, but sometimes a listening ear and your imagination can bring you to a compelling place as well, you know? Let's go ahead and do that.
Fully grasp the concept of butt breaking and the historic sexual exploitation of black people under the global system of white supremacy, we first have to go back into the history of Europe. We have to understand what created this ideology in the mindset of the white supremacists.
The European culture had no history of a civilizing educational process called culture before they meet us. So you're dealing with someone that's moving from the level of the animal, responding only to instincts and desires. And whatever it takes to fulfill that, raping, murdering, plundering, pillaging, has been the history of Europe.
They created a perverted way of looking at nature. And so it becomes important when we look at them, it's not just what they do, it's the perversion of what they do. In an ice age, you're going to create a certain mentality. When you are in a sun age, you're going to create a certain mentality. So what is very natural becomes unnatural in the ice. However, when you come back to the natural, you bring your unnatural with you.
The European sexual culture operated at the level of animal, responding to physical yearning, physical stimulation. The sacredness and the value that the African placed on giving birth was just the complete opposite in Europe. And so that's why you find so many occasions of Europeans involving themselves with the animals they were raising. In their past laws in Scandinavian countries, even today, having sex with sheep is appropriate.
The Greeks had gods devoted to, like Pan, which is a freak, like the satyr, which means like an animal that did people and animals, or Ganymede, the god that was bisexual. If you showed up, you had to like give him some. It was good. If you didn't, you got in trouble. I mean, you have people at pantheon where you have gods that are freaks that come and school people. Some of them are almost animal-like. You've got Bacchus. If you look at, I don't know if you've ever seen pictures of Bacchus, but I've seen a picture of Bacchus where he's a dude carrying this big thing of wine with hummingbirds or something with strings holding his penis up. A big long penis, a big thing of booth. If that's your God, okay. I mean, all bets off the table that it stops there, right?
When the Aryans, the Indo-Aryans, ran up into Black India, not only did they savage the place, not only did they brag and boast in their sacred literature about playing the black gods, playing the black skin of the gods, but they bragged about sodomizing the black gods.
As a matter of fact, as a part of their culture, you have agreements. This is how it was. If you had a boy that you were, having sexual relations with, 12, 13, 14, 15, you'd have to do a number of things. One, you'd have to promise him protection. Two, you'd have to promise that you would educate him. Three, you'd have to make sure that you would always provide for him, whatever that may be. There were actual terms and agreements when it came to you having sexual relations with a little boy.
You heard that?
What?
Terms and agreements when it came came to you having sexual relations with a little boy. So basically,
They
people are
made
just
it legal.
giving up their children
Yeah,
for a better life, or like I don't know, like I don't know, I don't understand that whole dynamic.
right.
How are they just letting them get that close to other people's children for that to go on?
Exactly. Exactly. The system is rigged, man.
Yeah, it's just a history of it, right? So let's continue.
Boy, back in the ancient Greek and Rome.
Professor Jane Ward, for example, in her book Not Gay, documents that a critical element of white male masculinity is the ability to have gay sex as a straight white man. She said that's a critical element of
You
white
see that shit,
male
though?
masculinity. So the very concept of white masculinity
Pause it
is
for a sec.
on the ability to sodomize, to have a human being is
No cap. That makes sense because I remember back in the day, elementary school, it was always the white boys that were doing that,
That gay
like
shit, right?
all that suspect shit, and like they're happy with it and all. Like
Yeah,
I remember them times. You're like, yo, what's wrong with
they're
these?
happy.
Yeah. So it's a historical something that's been implanted in there
Yeah.
from them times. All right,
Yeah.
let it continue. That's interesting though. That's very interesting because it kind of
So to prove that they're straight, it's crazy, bro.
okay,
This mentality,
right.
some
They have to
European
do
cockroach.
some suspect shit. Not to prove that they're straight, but to prove that they're a dominant straight male.
Exactly.
They have to
Exactly.
do some gay shit. Like,
Does that make any sense, right? So
backwards business is that.
that's how they gotta look at it, backwards, right? Pun intended.
only as great or as worse as his or her environment. In an ice age, where you are dealing with these temperatures, your babies are freezing in your arms to death. No mercy. And so they have this mentality of viciousness because they're reflecting their environment. And so when the ice ages began to melt, give or take about maybe 5,000, 7,000 years ago, they came back across the mountains. And when they came back across the mountains, they brought that mentality with them. When you're in the ice, you're not really thinking about healthy relationships. And quite frankly, when the urge hits you, any hole will do.
heterosexual sex for the
Oh,
white
yeah.
man. The only purpose of that is procreation.
What do you say?
Sex
said,
with a woman
When
was a
you're in the
necessary
ice, you're not
evil
thinking
to
about
white
healthy
folks.
relationships. Or when you're in the cold, any hole will do. So that's how they thought.
Oh boy.
So like, this shit is deep, bro. Fuck.
For pleasure, homosexual sex is preferred.
You hear that? For pleasure, homosexual sex is preferred. So they're just having sex with their women just to procreate.
Mhm.
When Europeans ventured out
Not for
and first
pleasure,
began to interact with Black society, there was a notable contrast of sexual behavior between these two cultures.
Typically, when people talk about buck breaking, they start on the plantation and they begin with the sexual abuse that our ancestors suffered on the plantation. But that sexual abuse started in West Africa when the Portuguese first encountered the West African men and women.
When we see all of the statues of naked Greeks and Romans with their extremely small penises, I think that we have to recognize that in some ways they are trying to emulate the African comfort with our bodies. But because this is not something that is native to their cultural norm, it begins to be misshapen.
What man from what ethnic group can stand up against a black man toe to toe in manhood? Nobody. Especially the European, who is at the bottom of the totem pole when it comes to genetic stability.
All the way back in Rome, in Greece, some of the rulers were transgenders. They would travel at night dressed as women to go hang out at brothels and go mingle with the people as a woman. This is the king of the whole nation. And he hanging out here looking like Betsy.
I remember reading an article many years ago about Romans in the Colosseum used to get giraffes to have sex with the old horse. And the giraffes had such large genitalia, one would bleed to death, and the audiences loved it.
When white Arabs began to gain control over parts of black society, there was an immediate attack on black male sexuality. And an early form of buck breaking, the castration of black males and turning them into eunuchs, began to happen on a regular basis.
They said the eunuchs would
Is that what? The
so close
castration and what?
that they would get so much information. So they can't.
Turning him to eunuchs, meaning no genitalia,
Oh boy.
So that would like make them undesirable, and that would break them, right?
Right.
Because when they came into the Arab world, the black Moors were banging off all the women, and they couldn't have that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's see how deep and insidious this shit is. Now, if you are a person of sound mind, body, how can you watch this and not be like, this is the truth? It's been recorded in history, man.
Mm-hmm.
How could you say, oh, this is garbage, this is propaganda? No. What they're doing is propaganda. They have big campaigns out right now telling you that you're a Sith gender. These other people are all sorts of other stuff, right?
Right.
And you're trying to figure it out. You're like, what's a non-binary person? Now they talk about it in this, They talk about all these new terminologies and all that. It's just to confuse the children.
Exactly.
Because they're not like us. They didn't come from a time where it was clear,
Mm-hmm.
We're going to grow up into this system of
all kind of different information, and
madness. Yeah.
they're gonna have to do their own research and figure it out, because there's so much information and a lot of it is bullshit that's thrown at everybody, or that's even out there. So they kind of, the next generation got it bad. So.
Yeah.
All the misinformation and distraction.
Yep.
Straight up, so that they couldn't start their own dynasties. Okay, they couldn't go out now and pregnant somebody with this king knowledge.
They would castrate them by cutting off their testicles and their penis completely because of population control and due to them not wanting them to procreate. This
population control.
And they did not want any spread of them because they didn't consider them to be human beings. So at that time, the castrating and the creation of eunuchs was, we don't mind allowing you to be around us, but we have to make sure that you can't dominate us, that you have no power drive, that you have no interest whatsoever in our women, because you're going to destroy our numbers, and you're going to increase in yours, and you're going to spread, and we don't want that to happen. So they wouldn't mind having little black boys or black men around them, as long as they could not actually be considered men and do anything that would be of interest to the women that they had.
Or you look at the ancient Greeks, the most feared fighters were the gay ones. And what would they do? They would tie two guys together at the ankle. If you've ever heard the expression, the joint at the ankle, that's because they get two guys that liked each other, tie their ankles together. They die for each other, put them up. They fight anybody. You can touch my man, I'll kill you. Don't look at my man.
Why would anybody be shocked about a gay person in Africa when you got the Catholic Church, which is a gay institution, a continuation of the Greco-Roman pedophilia and homosexuality in Africa, dominating these people for 200 or 300 years.
It is the case that there is evidence of homosexuality prior to the colonialism of the 19th century. But that pre-colonial homosexuality was brought by white Muslims. It's still, while it's pre-European, it's still foreign and white. It was the Turks who brought in the Mamluks. When the Mamluks, the slave soldiers of Islamic civilization, who were Turks, when they ruled Egypt, they brought homosexuality to Africa.
I think it's really interesting that right in the center of St. Peter's Square, when the Pope opens the shades to his window, he looks out at the structure that is often called the obelisk today. We should know that the obelisk is the symbol of the Tsar's erect penis. So that while they're removing penises,
the obelisk, what the Pope looks at?
Penis every morning when he opens the shades. The irony cannot be lost.
By the time the plantation systems were created in the Americas, the white supremacists learned how to master more strategic and insidious ways on how to buck break black men, and by extension, they learned how to break the spirit of black families.
Because in the patriarchal context, the male is considered the strength. And so if you break the male, then you break the woman and you break the children. So when I think of buck breaking, I don't solely think about just the male per se. And we have to understand that it also wasn't just sex either. You know, when you're breaking somebody, you can break them spiritually, you know, do different things. It doesn't have to be just sodomy. And so a lot of us, when we focus on buck breaking, we think about the African man or the African captive being taken out, you know, on a plantation, being brought in front of, you know, the women and children and sodomized in front of everybody. But another part of buck breaking is not being able to protect your children, being able to protect your women, not being able to provide for them. That's also breaking the man mentally and spiritually.
On plantations like this, we know that a lot of the black women who were enslaved here were exploited sexually, and we know this because of the offspring and the children they had. The children were mulatto octoroon, so that was the evidence of the sexual exploitation. But one thing that is not talked about is the sexual exploitation that happened to the black men on these plantations.
The whole European expansion, that was a homosexual enterprise. Victorian expansion, British expansion, most of those colonels were homosexuals. In fact, in a very important book, Homosexuality and Colonization, it's documented that
colonialism and homosexuality
were all seen as homosexual playground.
Part of the whole buck-breaking process was the emasculation of the male slave. And so they would take probably the strongest,
so homosexuality is inherently
most resistant, most outspoken European of the enslaved to make an example of him in front of everyone else. And part of making that example of him was to go through a process of complete and total humiliation, which included public flogging, which included actual rape.
As men, they would actually tie our hands down, spread our hands, spread our legs, and they would physically rape us. Slave masters would rape black men in front of his entire family. Sometimes in front of the whole plantation. They bring them all out. The bigger the black man, the stronger the black man, the more they would rape them, the more they would buck them, just to make sure that none of them would be inspired to do anything to fight back.
There's a lot of evidence of the white slave owners who were practicing sodomy against the black males. You had people like Thomas Thistlewood in Jamaica who talked about some of the black men who were sodomized out there.
It comes with an admission on both sides. You know, the black man doesn't really want to admit that he was in such a weakened state that he was able to be, buck broken by the slave master.
During antebellum slavery, around that time, homosexuality was still illegal, but you had a lot of white men who would practice it, especially on the enslaved people that they had on their plantations. And they would also have relations with each other that was very covert, and a lot of people didn't know about it. There was one white slave owner, James Hammond. He had diaries that are infamous, and there's a book about his diaries and his life where he sent a letter to another slave owner, Thomas Withers, and they were having a gay relationship with each other. And Hammond was a known pedophile at the time. He molested some of his own nieces. So we know some of the things that he was doing to the black people, especially the black men on those plantations.
It was continually a process of making sure that there was no energy to do anything against me. You're not going to fight me. Why? Because I just destroyed your champion. I just destroyed your man. I just destroyed your father, your brother, your uncle, your grandfather. I destroyed him. And he's your protector because you are consciously and culturally imbued with the idea that the man is the protector and the provider. So if I destroy your protector and your provider, you will become my slave by default.
The white LGBT community, they've always had an anti-black sector of their society that has always negatively targeted black people. Lord Cornbury, going back into antebellum slavery, Cornbury was one of the first governors of the province of New York and New Jersey. He was a transgender. This was a person who dressed like a woman, and also this was the person who helped expand slavery in the United States against black people.
The process of feminizing the native culture was to sodomize the male, because the white man has a sick paradigm that the only homosexual is the one who's being sodomized, but the sodomizer retains his masculinity.
There's a sickness that they act like if you're not the receiver, that it's not gay or some shit like that. But listen, if your dick is getting hard for another man, you're gay. Even if you're just thinking about it, you don't even have to do the act. Like if you think about it and you get that little twinge, oh, you gay. Like, make no mistake about it.
They had whole farms. They had buck-breaking farms on multiple areas. Jamaica is one. They had them in different other islands all throughout America, of course, where they would make sure, and a buck, so we can understand, is a male horse. You know, you're dealing with male animals, particularly a buck, male deer, etc. But they refer to us as a buck because we are like an animal, a horse. Put us in stables. They would actually take the horses out of the stables, put black men in the stables, and then bring women into each stable just so we can have sex with them and get them pregnant for a number of purposes to create more slaves.
I got some young man on the stand, and I use the man loosely because that's his status. How do you support yourself, young man? Yo, be honest, with due respect, I got 4 ladies take care of me. They give me anything I want. They think I need. I got 2 of them good JOBs, one get a crazy check, the other get a LDC. They takes care of me. So you don't worry about what you do. Well, I smooth them out. What do you do? Well, that's what I do. That just sounds like gigolo action, but see, you've been programmed to think that way. You're like a slave on a plantation. The buck who gets rewarded for knocking up all of the fillies on the plantation, so master can have larger herds of livestock.
I literally have
crazy
branch in my family with the you put someone's testicles on the scale to see how big they are, but then God be a breeder. I'd give them a silver dollar for every child each time a woman gets pregnant. Whereas I can get the unlimited sex being, I guess, sort of fun. If that man had any connection to any one of those women or any of those children that would come from a union, he has to depersonalize that because it's work.
But more than that, we couldn't be men, right? And that dynamic in and of itself became a problem. We were perceived as cattle. We had gender, we had male and female, but we couldn't be men and women. Those came with legal rights. Those came with, with options in the society to express yourself and to vote, to
buy property. You could move where you wanted to willingly. That was not something we were able to do. So this removal of man and woman, this removal of categories of gender, dehumanized us by letter of law.
There's one very familiar story of an enslaved African woman who says that she is married to an enslaved African man. And as she is married to him, she tells the story of him climbing in her bed. And she's prepared for him. She kicks him out of the bed. And as he attempts to get back in the bed, she grabs the poker and slams it into his head. Often that story of this man whose name is Rufus is told as if he is a sexual exploiter, as if he's a rapist. But we need to think more deeply about how the system controlled Black sexuality, how it undermined Black womanhood, and even really undermined Black manhood. He did not marry her out of choice. This was part of the crude slave breeding system. He was being forced to engage in relationships with this woman.
At one point, there were documents where the U.S. government took audio recordings during the 1930s and the 1940s of Black people who were former slaves. And a lot of them recalled during slavery, they were degendered to a certain degree, meaning that their individual sexuality was not recognized. The Black boys and girls were all treated interchangeably. And a lot of the Black males, when they were children, they said that they had to wear dresses. They would put everybody in dresses. And that was a way to degender and to dehumanize a group of people. If you don't look at them as a gender or what their gender is, if you just make them interchangeable, you can dehumanize them to a certain degree. And that was a very common thing during slavery, the degendering of Black people.
From what I've read, like the workloads were the same. Like we had to still do the same thing, regardless if I was a woman, if I was pregnant, or whatever the case may be. I still had to do the same thing. Like the work was still required if we were out in the field, you know. So the only times my sexuality or my femininity would be acknowledged would be to fulfill the lust of the slave master. So that's what we become to base femininity to is sex, because that's the only time we were able to show any type of femininity.
Peter Sawale was another Black man who was buck broken during the antebellum slavery time period. He was up in New York, and he was a Black man who would cross-dress, put on women's clothing, women's wigs, and he would prostitute himself, and he would also get white males and take them in alleys and finesse them and pickpocket them. And he went to trial out there. There was another infamous case with him. A lot of his victims didn't want to
Call
come
him
forward
Beefsteak
because they were
Pete.
embarrassed to find out that the person who finessed them and robbed them was a Black man pretending to be a woman. The media at the time gave him the nickname Beefsteak Pete because he had male genitalia and he was pretending to be a woman.
The whitenized version of Christianity that they had been taught. And incidentally, religion was used as a process of buck breaking because it was used to basically make us more docile and more submissive. They would basically cherry pick scriptures and feed them to you. They would create a slave Bible that took out any references to justice and to freedom. And they would have these preachers go and preach messages about slaves being obedient to your masters, obey master. That's how Nat Turner started out.
If you go to the Bible Museum, it's not far from there. They used to have a slave Bible. Black folks were taught that they needed to be broken and slaves to white people. They had the perverse Bible. The fundamentals of them allowing blacks
The Negro Bible
is
Right.
whatever bad happened to them as God's will.
The speech given by Sojourner Truth, Ain't I a Woman? That was based on the degendering of the Black man and the Black woman. She talked about how she had to do the same type of work as a man. Ain't I a woman? I got to go out here and pick the cotton like a man. Ain't I a woman? Because she was responding to the white feminists talking about women's rights. So she was being critical of the white feminist movement. But the white feminist movement, they've taken that Ain't I a Woman speech and put that as if she was talking for women's rights. And Sojourner Truth was talking about the rights of all Black people, and she was talking against the ungendering of Black people.
White supremacy is a mom and pop operation. A white mom and a white pop kick the rest of us in the ass. They steal our labor. They've exploited us, and they do it together. Now, how they get along once they get the proceeds in the big house, sipping their juleps and having affairs and all, that's a different issue of how they fight each other. But ultimately, white lesbian feminism, white male supremacy are two wings of the same bird.
At some point, you had just as many white female slave masters as white male slave masters, and they were just as brutal as them. You know, some of the males on the plantations, they were raped by white female masters. And I know some people might think that that's odd to hear that a man got raped, but you know, it was unconsensual sex, so it was rape, and so that's a part of buck breaking as well.
Right now, we are in the French Quarters area of New Orleans, and we are right in front of the Madame Lillerie mansion. Madame Lillerie was a very infamous slave owner who was known for torturing the enslaved Foundation of Black Americans right in this very mansion. She was known to chain some of the enslaved people to stoves and starve them for weeks on end. She would keep enslaved people in cages and do all of these crude experiments on them. There was one situation where one of the enslaved people had their bones broken and then reconfigured to that of a crab, so the person looked like a human crab. This woman also conducted crude sex change operations.
Yeah.
Enslaved Foundation.
How the hell is that?
Her torturous ways.
How does that happen?
There was a very young black girl who was
She
enslaved in the
reconstructed their bones to look like a crab?
Madame Lillerie, and this little girl jumped out of that top window behind us and killed herself.
Men could be the victims of rape as well, and it was a lot that happens. And even with like some of these white women, you know, they like to put on this trope that black men were just these savages, these brutes who couldn't keep their hands off of them, when it was the opposite. They were so much attracted to our men, and the men were not able to turn them down and refuse them. You know, so it goes both ways. We were both basically objectified to the point where masculinity and femininity at its core is just sex at this point.
And the girl jumped out of that window. The city of New Orleans and the people found out about the crimes and the horrific torture chambers that were going on in this house, and they ended up running Madame Lillerie out of New Orleans. Now, you have to be extremely horrific that white people would run a slave owner out of the city because of the cruelty to the enslaved black people. But this mansion, people still say this is one of the most haunted houses in New Orleans, and many people for years did not want to own this mansion.
Feminism wouldn't exist were it not for black men. Okay, Frederick Douglass, Martin Delany, it was black men who were angry that their mothers were raped by the master, beat by the master, separated from their kids. It's black men who were demanding fair treatment for women. And they gave power to those old white lesbians and the horses and buggies and so forth, because the raping continues in the new plantations. Child and Family Services, public schools, the weaponized, depraved black church. Yeah, I said it just like that. And prisons. The raping of black men continues, or for that matter, the music business or the military. I mean, most people aren't aware Jeffrey Dahmer was raping black men long before he got an honorable discharge, raping black men in the U.S. military.
This is the reason why you can draw a straight line from the image of the buck coming from the antebellum propaganda directly to images that you see on television today. That you can draw a straight line between the idea of the Jezebel and images you see today. The images aren't different, they've just been updated.
When black people got off the plantations after formal slavery in America, the buck-breaking did not end there. In fact, the buck-breaking techniques became more systemic, and they took on more violent forms, entering into the Jim Crow era.
The perception of black men in the dynamic of the plantation family, because the plantation was seen as a family. The white man was considered the father, the white woman the mother, and the enslaved were considered their children. the image of black men at that time was that we were grown children. We were to be raised, by this white family structure. The notion of the dangerous and rapist-oriented black male really doesn't gain traction until really the early part of the 20th century and middle part of the 20th century. But earlier on, there was this idea that we were feminized, we were less masculine, we were weak, we were childlike.
For a lot of us, prior to the work of Ida B. Wells, believed that black men were lynched because they were sexual predators. But give thanks to Ida B. Wells' work, she found out that most of these men were lynched because they were black business owners. They were lynched because of economic envy. They were competing with white people economically.
And their castrating of us was the final blow all the way. That's the apex. That's the climax of that orgasmic feeling. Not only do I get pleasure out of removing his power, but by me castrating and removing his procreative organ, I actually now know that, guess what? If his is gone, mine is the only one left. So if his power is gone, his ability to be an individual, a man, a ruler, a king is completely gone. I have dethroned him. I have removed him from his godhood. I removed him from his nature. Now I'm the only one that exists. By default, I become the ruler. I'm the king. I am the power source. I'm the protector and the provider. I'm the master.
There's a reason 80% of the lynch victims were not just males, young black males. It derives from the Paracelsian corpse phenomenon of Europe. What's a Paracelsian corpse? The Christians of Europe had this theology, and this undergirds the phenomenon of lynching in America. The church had this theology that every human life, that the lifespan was an energy, and every human life is endowed with a set amount of this spiritual energy. If a human dies prematurely, he dies before he or she, but largely he, can spend all of his spiritual energy. The excess, the remaining spiritual energy can be harvested. And they said that that if a young male in particular died an immediate violent death, that's the best course to harvest the spiritual energy. They call this a Paracelsian corpse. There are stories of people who still have jars containing the genitalia of black men. There are stories of people who have the labia, which has been removed of black women. We're going to hear more about this as we move forward.
As lynchings and castrations became commonplace, there were also symbolic castrations of black people as well, particularly when it came to cutting and controlling black hair.
Well, from our very first contact with European and Arab slave catchers and masters, they would see our most ornate hairstyles, and one of the first things that they did to their new human cargo was to shave their hair, so disconnecting them from African culture and the adornment.
The hair is the symbol of your essence. It is your essence that frightens them. That wearing that hair a certain way says that you are aware of your essence. You are aware of your strength. You are aware of your beingness. And he has done everything in his power to destroy your consciousness of yourself, to destroy your human beingness. And so when you see somebody come up with natural hairdo and sacred locks and dressing in traditional clothing, first thing he sees is that that's not my slave anymore. I must now be afraid of him because the crimes I've committed are so atrocious. Anybody in their right mind is going to kill me when they find out about the crimes.
The symbolism behind anything dealing with removing our power, they had to cut off anything. So the penis, they cut that off because that would hang. The hair, they cut that off because that hangs. Everything dealing with power stretches toward the sun. It stretches out. It shows a level of extension or existence or prolonging of its existence. So they want to make sure we destroy that.
So I think that hair has always been used as a form of resistance. especially for African warriorhood. So whether we look at the Maasai of Kenya and Tanzania, in order for them to be warriors, they have to grow locks. And so you can tell how long a man has been a warrior based on the length of his hair.
I think that when you compare hair to virility, which is what people often think hair is, it's a connection to virility. I think that we should expect to see that European society has problems with black hair. This should be expected. Because we don't talk about it enough, we're not clear about its manifestations. It was just last year that New York City made it illegal to discriminate on workers based on wearing African hairstyles.
White people have had control over our bodies. They've been able to control where we go, what we do, even what we do sexually, of course. But in this day and age, the slavery is not so much physical as it is mental. So by telling us that having locks or having our hair in an afro or in its natural state is unprofessional, this is now a mental slavery that is taking place.
There have been so many laws in the United States that actually regulate Black women's hair and appearance. So even like the Tignon laws in Louisiana, where it was actually illegal for Black women to show their hair in public. Some say because the hair was seen as so ugly and unattractive that it needed to be covered up, but most say it was a way to prevent white men from being attracted to the beauty of Black women. But considering that Black women had to wear head wraps, and we could create the most Erykah Badu style, that it was still attracting white men's attention, and white women could not mimic that head wrap style. And so that it actually became a threat because the white men were more interested in the Black women in Louisiana than white.
Out here in Louisiana, during slavery, on plantations just like this, the French was dominating this area. And whenever there were Black people who ran away from the plantations, they would get branded. And the brand would be a logo of the French heraldry. It's the fleur de lis. And they would get branded on their shoulder,
Like the Quebec
or they
fleur
would
de
get
lis.
branded on their cheek with this
New
fleur de lis logo.
Orleans.
And what's interesting about this logo, now today, this same logo is the logo for the New Orleans Saints football team. So a football team dominated by Black people playing today are walking around with logos of runaway slaves.
And it's so ironic that so much of the brutality meted out against African men, against Black men, is supposedly because we are lusting for white women, something that we have no record of happening whatsoever.
In the Caucasian culture, they have this sadistic type of mentality when it comes to sex, where the more depraved, the more nasty, the more disgusting, the more immoral you can get, the more enticing and attractive it is. They even choke themselves while they're masturbating, while they're being, involving themselves in sex, because they believe that increases the strength of the orgasm. So that symbolically is something that they were looking at when they were lynching Black men. They would lynch us because that choking is something, so they could see his power leaving his body, but they would get somewhat of this erotic type of orgasmic feeling about it.
When we talk about the white LGBT community trying to make comparisons to their struggle and Black struggle, the white LGBT community, they've never had a comparative struggle. In fact, their whiteness has always saved them, whereas the Black LGBT people, they've always been punished. So there has never been a comparative struggle.
As an LGBT person or whatever the letters are, I don't have to know that about you. You don't have to wear your sexuality on your sleeve, but there's no way that you can avoid seeing that I'm an original man.
The dominant society is backing your movement, then you're not really oppressed. You know what I'm saying? It doesn't make sense. If I'm truly oppressed and I need freedom and help so that I'm no longer disenfranchised, the people who are oppressing me are not going to promote my freedom. They're not going to help me to get it. You know what I'm saying? So the fact that this is being pushed and there's so much money and funding into it everywhere lets us know that you're really not honestly oppressed.
During the colonization of not just here in America, but over in Africa, you had colonizers like Cecil Rhodes. Cecil Rhodes was LGBT. A lot of folks don't know that he was a closeted LGBT, and he was doing certain things to the people over there.
The Nazis alive. They were
Right.
class.
Remember, you know when people say I'm a Rhodes Scholar?
It's a documentary or a book.
Yeah, Batiman Scholar.
Check it out. It's all about pederasty and the whole Hitler Youth and all of that. That's where they were.
Yeah. So basically, I'm looking at it like this.
Yeah.
This part one. You know what I'm saying? Everything that's I've seen so far is on point. Straight to it, you know?
Yeah.
Because it's an all-out assault, you know? A propaganda war. And everybody sees it. And people that don't see it act like they don't see it. It's because they don't want to see it.
Exactly.
And those are the people
Gotta handle it.
that can get left behind, you know? Or as you open more eyes, you'll see that. I mean, you can't stop motherfucker you want to do, you know? But this whole agenda thing,
Yeah. Been going on for years.
forever, man. Look how far back, man. And then they co-opted our movement in the 60s and 70s, talking about LGBT is the new black. That was one of their things.
Right.
So how is that? Y'all got oppressed like black people. Y'all were lynched like black people. Y'all were, you know what I'm saying? Forced into slavery like black people. Like, I don't understand. But granted, that's how it goes, man. When people watch in the mainstream and go whatever society's norm pushes on them, you got these type of situations, you know?
But this is it. The thing about it, I swear, is just making people aware. Like, they don't understand that these are actually
Yeah, awareness. Yeah.
Just provoking that thought to make them like actually look.
Awareness.
Not looking to make them actually look and see it for what it is. So it's definitely it's needed. It's needed for sure. Gotta break it down to people sometimes and just say, look, it can do different things. Look at all these factors. Now look at the climate of the world right now. You see any correlations? And boom. Eventually people will tap in. I have no choice.
Right.
You only run from yourself. So after a while, you'll catch it.
Well, what do you say to the ones that say ain't no conspiracy? Everything's peaches and cream. We should all take the vaccine and there's nothing.
Man, I would say, make yourself as aware as possible. Make sure you do research, knowledge required from your standpoint.
It could be sorry.
For real.
Don't just go with the status quo. Like, do your own research and stuff like that.
Jeez. Do your own research. Make sure you keep thirst. Gotta wonder why everybody want to be first.
You know what I mean, man?
That's true though. Because it's not a race, you know. It's a marathon. And like Nipsey said, the marathon continues. Your boy Mike Mills, this part one of Buck Breaking. We're gonna do part two tomorrow night. You know what I'm saying, y'all? You already know what time it is.
Yes, sir.
People real in the field. Forget how they feel.